Olorunfimi Street, like any other side street in Lagos, pulsed with the vibrant energy of daily life. The air buzzed with the chatter of neighbors swapping stories, the playful shouts of children, and the rhythmic hawking of street vendors. It was a close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets rarely survived the morning gossip sessions. Every corner was a potential meeting point, marked by warm greetings and familiar smiles. Nobody passed without a good morning or good afternoon, a sign of respect and connection. Among the familiar faces was Baba Ari, an elder who seemed as much a part of the street as the potholes and the mango trees. Every morning, he would settle outside his modest bungalow, his ancient transistor radio murmuring softly as he slowly savored his cup of hot pap. Baba Ari wasn't just another resident. He was the street's unofficial guardian, its keenest observer. Nothing escaped his notice, and he was always the first to spread any unusual news. Then there was Chidinma, a vibrant young woman who assisted her mother at their small provision shop. Known for her infectious smile and friendly nature, Chidinma greeted everyone who passed, a cheerful beacon in the street's daily rhythm. Woe betide anyone who forgot to return her greeting. She would call after them, a playful scolding echoing down the street. "Ah, brother, you no fit greet?" Toward the far end of Olorunfimi Street, Mama Yabo had recently opened a small Amala joint. Though a newcomer, she had quickly woven herself into the fabric of the community. From day one, the aroma of her cooking had drawn crowds, a siren call to hungry bellies. Her Amala, Bigairai, and Yudu were legendary, so delicious that people traveled from neighboring streets just for a taste. But beneath the seemingly peaceful surface of Olorunfimi Street, an unsettling undercurrent was stirring, something that only Mr. Benson's dogs seemed to sense. Mr. Benson, who lived next door to Mama Yabo's shop, owned 2 imposing dogs. Usually, they were quiet and friendly, their tails wagging at familiar faces and barking only at strangers. But ever since Mama Yabo and her family arrived, their behavior had drastically changed. Every time the family passed their gate, the dogs erupted in furious barking, growling and pacing as if in the presence of something inherently dangerous. At first, Mr. Benson dismissed it as territorial behavior. But as time wore on, it became increasingly clear that something was profoundly disturbing the animals. The more frequently Mama Yabo and her family went to and from their shop, the more agitated the dogs became. For months, nobody paid much attention to the dogs barking. Mama Yabo's Amala joint had quickly become the most popular spot on Olorunfimi Street. From the early hours of the morning, the tantalizing scent of hot Amala simmering on the stove permeated the air, luring customers like bees to honey. It wasn't just the food that captivated people. It was the atmosphere. There was something deeply comforting about sitting on the weathered wooden benches outside the small shop, savoring a steaming plate of Amala with bigairai and assorted meats, watching the ebb and flow of street life. Mama Yabo was a short, plump woman, her face perpetually adorned with a warm smile and a welcoming greeting for everyone who crossed her path. She worked alongside her 2 daughters and a young man, whom most assumed was her son. The girls were quiet and efficient, their movements precise and coordinated, while the young man handled the money and served the customers with practiced ease. Together, they ran the joint like a well-oiled machine. People from all over the area flocked to Mama Yabo's. Even Baba Ari, despite his advanced age, made it a point to stop by at least twice a week. He loved to sit on the benches outside, listening to his radio and savoring his meal. Even Chidinma, constantly busy at her mother's provision shop, would always find time to grab a plate. "This Amala is magic," she would declare, licking her fingers after every mouthful. Even though the family didn't talk much, people felt at ease in their presence. They never caused any trouble, and they kept their shop impeccably clean and tidy. It was the perfect business, and it seemed as though nothing could possibly go wrong. The Amala was always perfectly soft, the bigairai expertly seasoned, and the customers were consistently happy. But while the residents of Olorunfimi Street indulged in their meals without a second thought, Mr. Benson's dogs harbored a different opinion. Every time Mama Yabo or one of her children walked past, the dogs would erupt in furious barking, their sharp cries cutting through the air like a warning. They seemed to sense something that the rest of the street was blind to. "I don't know why these dogs keep barking at them," Mr. Benson said one day, shaking his head in bewilderment. "They've never acted like this before." His dogs were usually so calm and friendly, and they had seen the family every day for months. Yet their reaction never changed. Every time the family passed by, the barking would start up again, as if the dogs were desperately trying to alert the street to some unseen danger. "If only these dogs could talk," Mr. Benson muttered to himself one evening as the dogs barked uncontrollably once again. But to everyone else, Mama Yabo and her family seemed perfectly ordinary. They ran their shop, greeted their customers, and went about their business like everyone else. Nobody thought twice about it. But as the days went by, a subtle shift began to occur. The Amala joint was still as popular as ever, but a growing unease began to permeate the atmosphere, a feeling that nobody could quite explain. Little by little, things started to feel different. At first, the changes were so subtle that they went largely unnoticed. People still flocked to Mama Yabo's Amala joint, relished their meals, and engaged in the usual small talk. The joint remained as bustling as ever. But slowly, something began to shift. The warmth that had once enveloped the small shop began to dissipate, and the family's behavior became more distant, more unsettling. It began with the greetings. Mama Yabo had always been one of the most polite people on the street. Every morning, she would greet everyone who passed by her shop, her voice brimming with energy, her smile radiant. Her two daughters and the young man who worked with her would always follow her lead, nodding and greeting customers as they set up for the day. It was a cultural norm that everyone on Oloronfimi Street deeply valued. But one day, Chidinma noticed something peculiar. She passed by the shop on her way to the provision store, as she always did, and waved at Mama Yabo. "Good morning, Mama Yabo," she called out cheerfully. But this time there was no reply. Mama Yabo didn't look up, didn't smile. She didn't even seem to hear Chidinma. Chidinma frowned. Maybe she didn't hear me, she thought. So, she tried again the next day. But the same thing happened. No response. Mama Yabo's daughters, usually quick with a greeting, simply continued with their work, their faces blank, their eyes avoiding contact with anyone who passed. It wasn't just Chidinma. Other people on the street started to notice as well. One by one, they began to whisper among themselves. Baba Ari, who sat outside his house every day, listening to his radio, noticed the change too. "These people have stopped greeting," he said one afternoon, scratching his head. "Before, they would greet me every morning. Now they just walk by like they don't see me." "I thought it was just me," Chidinma replied. "I greet them every day, but they act like I'm invisible." At first, people tried to make excuses for them. Maybe they were tired. Running an Amala joint wasn't easy after all. But the strange behavior persisted, and as the days went by, the family became even more withdrawn. They no longer spoke to the customers the way they used to. They served the food, took the money, and went back to their work in silence. Even when the shop was bustling, the atmosphere felt cold, almost eerie. And the dogs, Mr. Benson's dogs, noticed it too. If anyone should have grown accustomed to Mama Yabo's family, it was those dogs. They saw them every day, heard their voices, and watched them move back and forth from the house to the shop. But instead of growing accustomed to their presence, the dogs seemed more agitated than ever. Every morning, when Mama Yabo and her children passed by on their way to open the shop, the dogs would bark furiously, their growls low and menacing, their barks sharp and relentless. They barked so loudly that it disturbed the entire street. It wasn't just one bark and then silence. It was continuous, as if the dogs were trying to send a message, a warning. "I don't know what's wrong with these dogs," Mr. Benson muttered one evening, shaking his head in frustration. "They've never acted like this before. Every day it's the same thing. As soon as that family walks by, they go crazy." It wasn't normal, and Mr. Benson knew it. His dogs had always been friendly, calm, even around strangers. But something about Mama Yabo's family was different. "Chidinma," standing outside her mother's provision shop, watched the scene unfold one morning. The dogs barked violently, pacing back and forth behind the gate, their eyes locked on the family as they passed by. Yet Mama Yabo and her children didn't seem bothered at all. They didn't flinch, didn't even look in the direction of the dogs. They walked silently to the shop, opened the door, and began their day as usual. "What is it with these dogs?" Chidinma asked, turning to her mother, who stood beside her. "I don't know, but it's not normal. Dogs don't bark like that for no reason," her mother replied, shaking her head. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers on Oloronfimi Street grew louder. People who had once adored the Amala joint now felt uneasy. The food was still as delicious as ever, but the warmth and friendliness that had once defined the place were gone. The shop was busy, but it felt cold, lifeless. Customers noticed that the family barely spoke to each other anymore. And when they did, it was in hushed tones, in a language nobody on the street recognized. "They're not Yoruba," Baba Ari said one day, speaking to a group of men who had gathered outside his house. "I've been listening to them, and the language they speak, it's not Yoruba. It's not Hausa or Igbo either. I don't know what it is." The men nodded in agreement. It was another strange piece of the puzzle that nobody could figure out. As the mystery deepened, so did the tension on Oloronfimi Street. The dogs continued their relentless barking, and people continued to whisper, wondering what had changed. Why had the family become so distant? Why were the dogs so disturbed by them? Was there something they were hiding? Nobody had the answers, but one thing was clear. Something was wrong with the Amla sellers. The people couldn't see it, but the dogs could. And if only they knew what the dogs were trying to say. As the weeks passed, the unease on Oloronfimi Street grew stronger. Mama Yabo's Amla joint, once the bustling heart of the neighborhood, still drew customers. But people began to speak in hushed tones about the strange changes that had overtaken the family. There was something odd about the way they lived, something that didn't sit right with anyone who paid attention. For one thing, people began to realize that Mama Yabo and her family never seemed to leave the shop. At first, everyone had assumed they had a house somewhere nearby, that they lived like everyone else in the neighborhood. But as time went on, it became clear that the family actually lived in the small restaurant itself. The shop wasn't large, just a single room with a kitchen at the back, and it had no windows. Yet, every night after they closed up, the family would stay inside, and nobody ever saw them leave. It didn't make sense. Lagos was known for its sweltering heat, especially during the dry season. On nights when the temperature soared, when even the wind refused to blow, people on Oloronfimi Street would drag their mattresses outside, hoping to catch a breeze. Mr. Benson's compound was always filled with people sleeping in the open air, trying to escape the stifling heat inside their homes. But not Mama Yabo's family. No matter how hot it got, they stayed inside the shop. People began to whisper that the family must have a way to cool the place down, maybe a fan or an air conditioner. But that theory didn't hold water. Everyone knew there was no electricity in the shop after hours, and besides, the building had no windows for any cool air to circulate. Yet somehow, the family appeared comfortable while everyone else on the street sweated through the night. "They never come outside," Chidinma said one evening, standing by the gate of Mr. Benson's compound with her mother. "It's so hot, and they stay inside that small shop like nothing is happening. It's not normal." Her mother replied, shaking her head. "Even me, I can't sleep in this kind of heat." The more people talked, the more they realized how strange the family's living arrangements were. The shop had no windows, no proper ventilation. Even during the day, when the sun was at its highest, the family would stay inside, cooking and working as if they didn't feel the heat at all. It was as though they were untouched by the things that affected everyone else on the street. And then there were the dogs. It was unusual because typically, dogs in the neighborhood grew accustomed to the people they saw every day. After a while, they stopped barking at familiar faces. "I don't understand it," Mr. Benson said one afternoon, talking to a few neighbors who had gathered outside his house. "My dogs have never acted like this. They should be used to that family by now, but every time they see them, it's like they're seeing strangers." "It's not just your dogs," Baba Ari added, sitting on his usual chair. Dogs can sense things we can't. They're seeing something that we're not seeing. The neighbors nodded in agreement. Everyone had their theories, but nobody could explain why the dogs were so agitated. The constant barking had become a daily routine. Every time the family passed by, the dogs would growl and bark until they disappeared into the shop, and even then, the dogs would continue to pace near the gate, uneasy and restless. The mystery deepened. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why did everything about them feel so off? As the whispers grew louder, so did the tension. People still came to the shop, but they came with a sense of unease, as though something unseen was lurking just beneath the surface. The family's strange living conditions, the dog's constant barking, and the unfamiliar language all pointed to one thing. There was more to Mama Yabo's family than met the eye. And while the people of Olaranfimi Street tried to make sense of it, the dogs kept barking whenever they sighted any member of the strange family. Things went on like this until New Year's Eve, when something unexpected happened. The end of the year brought a festive atmosphere to Olaranfimi Street. The air was filled with the sounds of celebration, children running around with sparklers, families setting up chairs in front of their homes, and the smell of food wafting from kitchens as everyone prepared for the new year. As was tradition, most of the residents stayed up for the crossover into the new year, either attending church or celebrating with family and friends. But as the neighborhood prepared for the celebrations, one thing stood out. Mama Yabo's Amala shop was still open late into the night. It was unusual for the shop to be open so late. Normally, Mama Yabo closed up around 9 p.m. But on this particular night, the lights inside the shop stayed on, and the family could be seen moving about, cooking and serving food to the few late-night customers. Some people on the street wondered if they were staying open longer to make some extra money before the new year, but nobody questioned it. After all, Mama Yabo's family had always done things differently. Mr. Benson, who had just returned from a New Year's Eve service with his wife, noticed the lights still on in the shop as he passed by. "Ah, they're still open," his wife asked, surprised. "Maybe they're trying to make some extra sales before midnight," Mr. Benson replied, glancing at the shop. The dogs, however, were unusually quiet that night. Normally, they would bark at the family whenever they passed by. But on this particular night, they seemed calm, lying quietly in Mr. Benson's compound. It was strange, but Mr. Benson didn't think much of it at the time. As the clock struck midnight, the sounds of fireworks filled the sky, and the people of Olaranfimi Street celebrated the arrival of the new year. There was laughter, music, and the clinking of bottles as neighbors wished each other well and made plans for the year ahead. But in the midst of the celebrations, nobody paid much attention to Mama Yabo's shop. By the next morning, everything changed. When the sun rose on New Year's Day, the people of Olaranfimi Street were met with an unsettling sight. Mama Yabo's shop, which had been buzzing with activity just hours before, was completely empty. The door was closed, the lights were off, and there was no sign of the family. It wasn't just that they had closed for the holiday. Everything was gone. The pots and pans that had always been stacked outside the shop were missing. The benches where customers usually sat had been cleared away. Inside, the shop was bare, as if no one had ever been there. Nobody had seen them leave. I passed by there around 2 a.m. after the service, and they were still there, Mr. Benson said, shaking his head in disbelief. But now it's like they disappeared. Chidinma was one of the first to notice the disappearance when she went to buy Amala that morning. "Mama Yabo, are you there?" she called out, knocking on the door. But there was no answer. When she peeked inside, she was shocked to find the shop completely empty. She ran back to her mother's shop, her heart racing. "Mama, they're gone. The shop is empty." Her mother frowned. "What do you mean, gone?" "They're not there. Everything is gone. The whole place is cleared out." News of the disappearance spread quickly across Olaranfimi Street. Neighbors gathered around the empty shop, whispering to one another, trying to make sense of it. Nobody had seen them pack up or leave. No trucks, no cars, nothing. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. "They couldn't have just left without anyone noticing," one man said, scratching his head. Maybe they moved in the middle of the night, another suggested. But no one could explain how they had left without a trace. The shop was completely bare, and there were no clues as to where the family had gone. No witnesses, no evidence, just an empty shop and unanswered questions. As the days passed, the disappearance of Mama Yabo and her family became the main topic of conversation on Oloronfimi Street. People who had once gathered at the Amala joint to share a meal now gathered outside the empty shop to speculate about what had happened. Everyone had a theory. Some believed that the family were ghosts, spirits who had once lived on Oloronfimi Street long ago. They pointed to the family's strange behavior, their refusal to greet, the way they lived inside the shop with no windows, and the language they spoke that nobody could understand. To them, it made sense. The family had never belonged to the living world, and now they had returned to wherever they came from. You know, there are old stories about this area. One of the older women on the street said, "It's possible that they were spirits, and they only came back for a short time." Others thought the family was running from something, perhaps debt or some unknown danger that had finally caught up with them. They speculated that the family had been living on the run for years, moving from place to place, never staying in one location for too long. Maybe they had been recognized by someone, or maybe they had gotten into trouble, and that's why they left in such a hurry. One man said, "I wouldn't be surprised if they owed someone money. People don't just disappear like that unless they're running from something." But Baba Ari, always the voice of reason, had a different theory. He believed the family's strange behavior could be explained by mental health issues. "Look, it's possible they were struggling," he said one afternoon, sitting with a few of the neighbors. "The way they refused to greet, the way they lived in that small shop without windows. It could be that something was wrong with them. Maybe they needed help." The neighbors nodded, considering his words. It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't answer all the questions. What about the dogs? For months, Mr. Benson's dogs had barked relentlessly at the family, growling and pacing every time they passed by. But since the family's disappearance, the dogs had been calm, not a single bark. It was as if the source of their agitation had vanished along with the family. "It's strange," Mr. Benson said, watching the dogs laze around in the yard. "They haven't barked once since that family left. It's like whatever was bothering them is gone now." The fact that the dogs were no longer barking only fueled the rumors that the family had been something more than human. "Maybe the dogs knew all along," Chidinma whispered to her friend. "Maybe they were trying to warn us." As the weeks passed, life on Oloronfimi Street slowly returned to normal. The noise and bustle of the neighborhood continued, and people went back to their daily routines. The empty shop where Mama Yabo once served Amla remained vacant, a silent reminder of the mystery that had taken place. But the story of Mama Yabo lingered in the air like a ghost haunting the street. Chidinma, who had once visited the shop every day, couldn't stop thinking about the family. Where had they gone? Would she ever see them again? She walked past the empty shop every morning on her way to her mother's store, always half expecting to see the family return. As for Mr. Benson, he still found it strange that his dogs were back to their old calm selves. For months, they had barked endlessly at the family, but now they lay quietly in the yard as if nothing had ever happened. In the end, the mystery of Mama Yabo and her family remained unsolved. Whether they had been ghosts, struggling with mental health, or simply running from their past, no one could say for sure. The people of Oloronfimi Street had their theories, but the truth remained elusive. Life went on, but the story of the Amla sellers would never be forgotten.